Welcome to the third part of the history of the NWO. As I said, I have no idea how many parts this is going to be. But next week, we're taking a break from the history of the NWO and we're taking a look at the history of misting in wrestling. But for now, we're looking at the NWO again. We're still in WCW. Last week, we led off. Hogan just beat Savage for a title by cheating. And people are going to have to decide whose side they're on, Nash's or Hogan's. So on the May 30th episode of Nitro, Nash, Savage, and Conan come out wearing black and red NWO shirts and calling themselves the Wolfpack. And they would wrestle as faces, be the first NWO to wrestle as faces. They'd be joined by Curt Hennig, Rick Rude, Miss Elizabeth, and Dusty Rhodes. Meanwhile, the rest of the NWO, Hollywood Hogan, Brian Adams, Scott Norton, Scott Steiner, and Buff Bagwell and Eric Bischoff would be known as NWO Hollywood and would continue to wear the black and white NWO shirts. I'm sure I forgot somebody, but I don't remember who. And would wrestle as heels. This would start the NWO War. Now, the next pay-per-view, Nash and Hall are scheduled to defend their tag team titles against the Giant and Sting. Hall comes out initially wearing a Wolfpack shirt, but him and Dusty Rhodes turn on Nash, giving the Giant and Sting the championship. Now, the Giant recently joined NWO Hollywood and is pressuring Sting to join NWO Hollywood. Shortly thereafter, Lex Luger joins the Wolfpack and urges Sting to join the Wolfpack. Sting has a decision to make, and on a Nitro, he makes his decision. Fooling Hogan into thinking he's joining Hollywood, he rips off his shirt and reveals a Wolfpack shirt and starts painting his face red and black instead of the usual white and black, which he's been wearing since 1996. Now, the Great American Bash, Rick Rude and Curt Hennig turn on Conan and join NWO Hollywood. But that's okay, because Sting defeats the Giant for the vacated tag team championship belts and picks Nash as his partner. Meanwhile, Savage on a show, I think it's a Nitro, but I'm not sure. I can't quite remember I can't quite keep all these together. Is facing Diamond Dallas Page with Roddy Piper as the referee. All three get attacked by NWO Hollywood, and Piper suffers a knee injury, which is really a story to get him off TV so he can have 2 knee surgeries. Not Piper, but Savage suffers a knee injury. It's really to get him off TV so he can have 2 knee surgeries. And this is the end of his affiliation with any NWO. Scott Hall is in the NWO Hollywood. He turned on after he turned on Nash, he joined NWO Hollywood. I'm thinking where I am. Meanwhile, there's a new challenger for Hogan's world title in the undefeated Goldberg, who's got over 100 wins. They promise him a title match with Hogan on Nitro, but Hogan says he has to go through Scott Hall first, which he easily does. And then he topples Hogan in the main event, winning his first world championship. This leads Hogan. His next two pay-per-view matches are celebrity matches. One where he teams with Dennis Rodman and wins against DDP and Karl Malone. And his next one involves Jay Leno, which comes up from Jay Leno making fun of Hogan on the Tonight Show. And Hogan and Bischoff take over the set, only for DDP to run them off. And it's Hogan and Eric Bischoff versus DDP and Jay Leno. And DDP and Jay Leno win with help from Kevin Eubanks. Meanwhile, the Nash and Hall feud continues. Now, I'm going to try to run through the rest of the history of the original NWO in this video. It might take 20 minutes, so people. The Nash and Hall feud continues. Eventually leading to a match at Halloween Havoc, where Nash just beats up Hall and then gets himself counted out, just saying he wants his friend back. Meanwhile, also, the Warrior comes in. You might remember him as the Ultimate Warrior to feud with Hogan. And he kidnaps a disciple who joins the One Warrior Nation. And Hogan gets a victory over the Warrior because his nephew, Horace Hogan, who is his actual nephew, joins NWO Hollywood. Now, World War III, Kevin Nash wins the 60-man tournament to get a title shot. But on the Thanksgiving episode of The Tonight Show, Hulk Hogan, or Hollywood Hogan, announces his retirement from wrestling. And Scott Steiner takes over NWO Hollywood. Now, I'm trying to think. Kevin Nash gets his match against Goldberg. And he brings an end to the undefeated streak. With help from Disco Inferno. And Kevin Nash doesn't see it, but Scott Hall comes out with a cattle prod, hits Goldberg with it, and then Nash hits a jackknife powerbomb. Goldberg has said he wishes Scott Hall had actually hit him with the cattle prod, because he wanted to know what it felt like. Because Goldberg is a little nuts. Nash, mad at Hall for hitting him with the cattle prod, because Nash wanted to win by his own, accepts Goldberg's challenge for a rematch shortly after the New Year on Nitro. But Miss Elizabeth accuses Goldberg of stalking her, so Goldberg gets arrested, while the returning Hollywood Hogan, Nash challenges for a match for the title. As the match begins, Hogan pokes Nash in the chest with his finger. Nash goes down, and Hogan gets the 1, 2, 3. And the NWO, both sides, come out to celebrate. Meaning the NWO is reformed as one group. The NWO Elite Wolfpack. This known as the Finger Poke of Doom, would lead WCW ratings to suffer dramatically. It is one of the sillier things WCW did. Now, Hogan is the champion again, and the NWO Elite Wolfpack goes to trim the fat from the lower ranks of the NWO, kicking Conan and the Giant out, which is really just reason for the Giant to leave WCW TV because he went to join the WWF and became the Big Show. And later, kicking out Kurt Hennig and somebody else. I don't remember who. Eric Bischoff makes a match between, but I think we're past that. So the NWO Elite Wolfpack is ruling the stable, while the B team, made of Vincent, Scott Norton, Stevie Ray, somebody else and somebody else. Disco Inferno and somebody else. I don't think it was Disco. I think it was somebody else and somebody else. Are known as the B Team and are still wearing the NWO black and white shirts. The leader is eventually declared Stevie Ray of the group, though Scott Norton did not compete in that match. And they would stay on TV longer than the NWO Elite would. The NWO Elite would eventually rule the airwaves, holding multiple titles with Hogan as the world champion, Scott Hall as the U.S. champion, Scott Steiner as the television champion, but would suffer a string of catastrophic injuries, with Scott Hall getting his foot ran over by a car and thus having to miss time. Lex Luger would tear his bicep and him and Miss Elizabeth would be off the air. Hogan would drop his title to Ric Flair in a barbed wire steel cage match, which Ric Flair would get a win for due to a crooked referee counting a pinfall when there were supposed to be no pinfalls in the match. And Hogan would also suffer an injury in a world title match, taking him off the air for 3 months. Nash would surprisingly not get injured, but Steiner would suffer a back injury, and they would strip him of the U.S. title. Meanwhile, the B Team would slowly distance themselves from each other. Stevie Ray would reform Harlem Heat with his brother Booker T. Horace Hogan would slowly go his own way. Scott Norton went back to Japan and was a member of NWO Japan. Brian Adams would get kicked out of the group, but would come back to WCW eventually and form Chronic with Brian Clark. And the other person I don't remember, so they probably didn't do anything important. Now, this was not the complete end of the NWO, as Hollywood Hogan would come back and would begin feuding with Nash over the title belt. With Hollywood Hogan actually being the face during this run. Because Savage beat Nash for title belt in a tag team match. And Hollywood Hogan began feuding with Nash, with Rick Steiner and Sid Vicious on Nash's side, and Goldberg and the returning Sting on Hollywood Hogan's side. They began feuding over the world title, which Hulk Hogan beat Savage for. Hulk Hogan, who returned to the red, Hollywood Hogan, who returned to the red and yellow, and dropped the Hollywood name and went back to Hulk Hogan, would eventually face Nash, putting his career and his title on the line, and Nash's career on the line, which Hulk Hogan would then win and beat Nash. And this would result in pretty much the end of the original NWO. And that's pretty much the end of the original NWO. The NWO would come back. As always, cockroaches always come back. So join us next week when we go into the history of misting in wrestling. Then a week after that, we're going back into the NWO with the NWO 2000. Black and Silver and Jeff Jarrett. Because they can't come up with original ideas.